We're up to Karbanos Psul. And the question is, in the context of defining a Maisa Tmura and when it's valid, what if the behemoth chulin itself is invalid? So you want to transfer Kedushas Mizbeach through the process of a Maisa Tmura, but the original, forget about the substitute, I'm talking about the original it's possible. And it can be possible for any number of possible reasons. It could be possible because of a Baal Mum. That's the case that he gives here. Hemer al behemas chulin balas mum. Harei din behemas zu ke behemas hegdesh shekodam hegdesha es mumcha. Okay, so first he switches it around. Now, we wanted to start the order where the behemas kodesh is a balas mum. He starts where the behemas chulin is a balas mum. And he says that the status of, well, first let's say the Maisa Tmura is in fact a valid Maisa Tmura, despite the fact that the Behemas Chulin could not possibly be brought on the Mizbeach, insofar as it's a Balas Mum. But on the other hand, through Tmura, all he wants to accomplish is that the shame carbon should be chal on the behemoth, on the behemoth chulin. Now, whether that once the chain carbon is chal, whether or not it can be brought on the mizbeach, that's a separate issue. So he says that this din, the status of this behemoth, is like a behemoth hegdesh. What's the deal with behemoth hegdesh? It is kodesh. And then later on, it becomes balas mum, so it becomes possible in this bear, but it still remains and retains its status as hegdish. Let's just see if he adds anything here on Kuf Vav. He tells you this is based on a Mishnah in Tmura Daf Tezayin Amud Beis. So we should probably open up that Mishnah, but in the meantime, let's take a look at the next paragraph. Now, what happens if the behemoth hegdesh, not the substitute as we saw yesterday, right? The substitute is a balas mum, but the behemoth hegdesh itself, the original, is a balas mum, and it was kodem pidjona, and the status of a balas mum is that it retains its shem kodesh up until the moment of pidyon. Normally, Kedushas HaGuf L'Mizbeach does not lend itself to pidyon, but once it became a Baal Mum, then it lends itself to pidyon. But through the process of pidyon, you transfer the hegdesh over to the mos, but up until that point of pidyon, prior to pidyon, the hegdesh is still inherent in the animal itself. Is nechleku rishonim im hasover shavlad bali mumin eno karev hu biatzmo hu adin tmuras bali mumin eno kreva. I'm going to fast forward and then we'll go backwards again. O sha'af hasover shavlad bali mumin eno karev hu biatzmo mikol makom tmuras bali mumin kreva biatzmo. Now, the issue here is much more complicated than meets the eye because we have to know about Vlad Bali, but let's just leave out the details. On the next level, we'll have to study Vlad Bali, but on the surface level, in terms of the framework of the issue, the question is an animal that once had Kedushas Mizbeach, now it became a Balas Mum. That's just a blockage as far as Hakrav al Gabi Mizbeach, but the Etzem original Hegdesh still remains intact. So that because of the inherent vestige of the original Kedusha, he can effectuate a Shem Karban through the process of Tmura. And by virtue of a Maisa Tmura, he can take the original Shem Kodesh, which has within it, even though the animal is now a balas mum, the status of Kedushas Haguf L'Mizbeach, and transfer that Kedushas Haguf L'Mizbeach over to the Behemas Chulu, which is not a Balmum. It's a Tam. And therefore, the possibility arises that even though the original animal could not be brought on the Mizbeach, nevertheless, the Tmura could be brought on the Mizbeach, which is very paradoxical. We have a principle called Dayo Levamin Adin Lios Kinadim. The product, the child, the Tolda cannot be greater than the original, than the Ab. But here's a case within the constellation of Tmura, where it's possible, we're not definite about it, that's going to be a machlokas, but according to one view, the Behemas Chulin has a superior status to that of the original Behemas Kodesh, because once the original Behemas Kodesh became a Balas Mum, it's no longer fit for the Mizbeach. So that Kedushas Mizbeach is gone with the wind. And yet, I can create through a Maisa Tmura a Kedushas Karban Mizbeach in the Chulin, which is now a Tam and can be brought on the Mizbeach. Very paradoxical halacha. You and I would have said, well, if the Behemas Kodesh cannot be brought on the Mizbeach because it's got a mum, then ipso facto, the Behemas Chulin cannot be brought on the Mizbeach because it can only be a substitute, a clone from the Behemas Hegdesh that he started with. But the answer is that what he is cloning through the process of Maisa Tmura is not the exact identical status of the Karban Hegdesh Befal, but rather its inherent Kedusha. It's Shem Kodesh. And in Shem Kodesh, the animal carries in it, or within it, the status of Kodshim Mizbeach. And that status is now cloned onto the substitute, namely the Tmura. And therefore, he says that Tmuras Bale Mumim Kreva Biatzma, according to that second Shita. We should underline those words because they're remarkable. They're remarkable words that the Tmura of a Bale Mum would be Kreva Biatzma. Now, the first opinion, if we go back up the ladder, is that Tmuras Bali Mumim Eina Kreva. Now, if you would have asked me, but thank God you didn't ask me, what should be the status of the Behemas Chulin, meaning the Tmura Behema, in this case, I would have said that it should lend itself to Pidyon. Because the whole thrust of this first opinion is that the clone should be equal to the original. And the original lends itself to Pidyon as a Behemas Psule Mukdash, meaning a Balas Mum. So therefore the Tmura should likewise. But he says, no. What do you do with this Behemas Chulin after the Maisa Tmura? Tira Adjetistoy. We're going to have to do whatever we have to do behind the scenes to make sure that this animal becomes a balas mum. I would have said, who needs a mum? By definition, its kedusha is the kedusha that of a balas mum, because that's the source of its kedusha. No. We upgrade it, even according to this first shita. We're not going to upgrade it to the Shem Kodesh Limizbeach, but it definitely has a Kedushas Karban to it, and that Kedushas Karban is greater than the original, and therefore it doesn't lend itself to Pidyon, unless Yirad Sheyistayev, it becomes a Balas Mum. Okay, that's the general framework. Now we get down to the nitty-gritties. We have to go down into the mud. And he says that this depends upon another issue entirely, and that's called Vlad Bale Mumin. And on this, we have a tremendous machlokas. So you have an animal that was Hegdesh, Limizbeach, and then it became a Balas Mum. And that animal gave birth to a Vlad, the Vlad, the little shepsel or the little calf, is tam. It's not a balmum. One man the Omer says we'll bring it on the mizbeach. Again, we're looking at this from the same perspective that we applied earlier, that the Shem Kodesh that generates an expansion Shem Kodesh and applies to another animal is achieved, in this case, by Vlad. Once you have the Shem Kodesh, then since the Vlad is a Tam, it's not a Balmum, it can be brought on the Mizbeach. It means that the Shem Kodesh of the mother is Limizbeach, but just as a blockage that prevents us from bringing that carbon, that animal on the Mizbeach, and that is because it's a Balas Mum. The Mizbeach does not tolerate a Balmum. But if you isolate, or shall I say, bracket the impediment of the Mizbeach, which is generated by the status of a Balas Mum, and you focus simply on the carbon itself, the carbon itself has a full-fledged Kedushas carbon of Mizbeach. We won't bring it before on the Mizbeach, but it has the Kedusha of the Mizbeach. So now let's go according to the Mandi Omar, who holds that Vlad Bali Mumim Eino Karig Mizbeach. The Vlad is a secondary clone, a spin-off Kedusha that bounces off its mother. And since the mother could not be brought on the Mizbeach, ipso facto, the Vlad cannot be brought on the Mizbeach. Which means that when we have a situation of X creating Y, meaning object X is going to generate some sort of similar status to Y, then Y, the byproduct, has the exact same status as the original. And if the original cannot be brought on the Mizbeach, so too the product cannot be brought on the Mizbeach, because it carries within it an identical status to the original. And that's going to be a nafkamina in terms of Vlad Psulei HaMikdashim, or Vlad Bali Mum. The Vlad of a Baal Mum cannot be superior and have a Kedusha that exceeds beyond that of the mother. And since the mother is Pasul of Mizbeach, therefore the Vlad is Pasul of Mizbeach. That's one Mandi Omar. The other Mandi Omar is going to say, no, we're going to take the Vlad and bring it on the Mizbeach. And why? Because we're only cloning the Shem Kodesh. We're not cloning the Kedushas Mizbeach. We need just the Shem Kodesh. The Shem Kodesh encompasses both Kedushas Mizbeach and Psuli HaMikdash. What we're going to clone, what we're going to transfer over is the Shem Kodesh. And now we look at each individual cloned, meaning substitute, or cloned. And we'll see, is it Royal Mizbeach or is it not? If it's Royal Mizbeach, we'll bring it on the Mizbeach. That's the second Monday. And l'chora, the identical machlokes should apply here in Tmura. Because like Vlad HaKarbon, Tmuras HaKarbon is a clone of the original. If we're going to clone exactly the original, then it cannot be brought on the Mizbeach, because you're starting with the Balas Mum. If on the other, you're only transferring the Shem Kodesh, which means the original Kedusha that's still inherent in the animal, even after it became a Balas Mum, then the Tmura could be brought on the Mizbeach insofar as it doesn't have a psul of a Baal Mum. That's what we would have said that it's an exact match, what we call in the Gemara language, Hava Hatal. In fancy English, it's called interdependence. So it's a mirror image, the same halacha that will apply to Vlad HaKarbon, Vlad Balas Mum, will apply to Tmuras Balas Mum. They are mirror images of each other, and therefore the same issue as to how to define Vlad HaBalas Mum will apply to Tmuras Balas Mum. And then everything fits into a sweet package. No, it's more complicated than that. He says, Af hasover shevlad balibumim eno karev liatzmo, mikomakom tmuras balibumim kreva biatzmo. That's very paradoxical. Why is it that in Vlad Balasmum, the Vlad gains the same identical status as the original, as the mother, who's a Balasmum and cannot be brought on his back, but when it comes to Tmura, all of a sudden the Tmuras Balamum has a superior status and can be brought on the Mizbeach. Very strong. Now, for this, we might look at footnote number Kuf Zayin. No, he has nothing here, does he? You know what? I can't. I have to keep turning pages. I should bring out the Gemara. Megubetsis is stopping Pozach Atosis Nachdu Chalatiria Kol Karvim Yatsu. So L'dibri HaKol means, even according to that Mandiyoma, that the Vlad of a Balas Mum is not Karev Al Gam Mizbeach. Everybody would agree that the Tmura of a Balas Mum would be brought on the Mizbeach. All right. Now we get to a discussion about a behemas kodesh, a balas mum, li'achar pidyon. Which means that there's very little left to the original Shem Kodesh. The last vestige is an Itzer Gizav Avod. And now he wants to make a Tmura onto Behemas Chulin. Emir Behemas Kodesh Balas Mum Li'achar Pidjona Hareya Tmura Kedosh Ach Ena Krev. Do you see this, Rabbi? This is another example to prove our fundamental principle that the Tmura, paradoxically, could be greater than the original. And we don't say Daya Levam and Adin Leos Kinadu. The original is after Pidyon. And yet the Tmura doesn't even lend itself to Pidyon. So what are we saying now? Are we saying now the kedusha of the former behemas chulin, which is the tmura, is superior to the kedusha of the original carbon that's a balas mum after pidyon? No, that's not what we're saying. That would have been pretty simple. But he says, "Lefisha kedushasa kala, the ein bekocha litvos pidyon, el menicha ad shetomus." Paradoxically, you could have something which has a lower level of kedusha, and yet it doesn't lend itself to pidyon. Pidyon requires a higher level of kedusha. It's almost as if I would tell you that if you have an object that has mamoshes, it has substance to it, then you could carry it from place to place, transfer it over. But if you have something that becomes so thin and so refined, it's almost abstract. It's like a mist, of evaporating water. it doesn't have substance. You can't transfer it over to someplace else. So paradoxically, we need a minimum level of kedusha. It's a whole hierarchy of, a whole pyramid here of levels of kedusha. You have kedushas mizbeach, then you have a lower level which is called a balas mum that cannot be brought on the mizbeach. It lends itself to pidyon. Then you have another level going down of kedusha, which is called after pidyon. And then finally, you get to the rock bottom, which is a kedusha kala that's even lower down than a balas mum. And then Afkamida said it doesn't lend itself to pidyon. It's like so thin, like evaporating mist, that you can't possibly transfer its kedusha. What note do you have here? Let's see. Is this Kuf and no Kuf Ches? I don't even have Kuf Ches this side. Oh, Gemara B'chol. So it's interesting, the Tmuras Balas Mum Liachar Pidyon. So the original was number one, a Balas Mum, and number two was after Pidyon. But the Tmura doesn't lend itself to Pidyon. And that's the paradox, that it has the status of Hegnish, but it doesn't lend itself to Pidyon because it's too lower or low ebb level of Kedusha to be matris its Kedusha onto Mos through the process of Pidyon. Pretty amazing. Heimer Karban Ola al Behemas Chulin Nekeva. So an Ola, I think, has to be min hazach. We discussed it, but I don't remember all the details. This is at the very beginning of our introduction to Kodshim. So Steve is, I think, trying to get the original pages. You don't have, by chance, the original pages that we started with, do you? No. I probably have them here somewhere. See, a chatos comes from an akeva, and an ola comes from Zohar. What's the pasuk? Oh, there's a chart? Let me see that chart. Wow. Good. Okay. Ola would be a lamb or a bull, sheep, goat, cattle, but it's got to be men. And where's the chatos? One second, how come a chatos is not here? Oh, they put the chatos here. Chatos also seems to be mostly from a zachar, but there are a number of karbanos chatos that can come from an akeva. Now, if you would have asked me, I would have said that such a ma'aseh tvur is not chal at all. But yet the Gemara is assuming that there is a chalos tmura, which I assume means he'll get malchus as well. But on the other hand, it's an akeva, so the behemoth's chulin cannot be brought on the mizbeach as an olam. So the best you can do is tira ad she'istayet. What note is that? Is that Kufyu Tes? Kuf Tes? Rambam. Okay, now we go back to our discussion about Korban Pesach. But again, we're now in the context of male versus female. So a Korban Pesach is going to come from a male. Let's see if that's on this chart as well. I guess.
I don't know that second.
Oh, I see.
Before laser.
We have to turn a page.
Yeah.
Oh. What does the P stand for?
Personal.
Oh, interesting. But he writes that it's got to be a male. So again, we have the same question. If he was Meimir, a behemas, a Kodshim Pesach, onto a behemas chulin that's in a cable. Halacha im hemira kodem chatzos yom arbasa. Ena tmura atzma kreva elatirat shetistay v'timocher v'yovik b'dmei shlom. V'hemira le'achar chatzos yom arehi v'atzma kreva shlom. Again, kodem chatzos yom arbasa. So then we said he atzma kreva shlom. So that's really a repetition of what we saw earlier. Im yochol liskaper ba. I don't understand. What are we talking about here? Generally, in Torah, in Torah, I have to assume, I don't know, I'm really sticking my neck out here, that he's talking about cases of Tvura which are brought on the Mizbech. I don't understand. What's the Havamina? What's the other possibility that there's no kapara? The carbon is brought without kapara. Is there such a thing? In the constellation of Kodshim, of a carbon that doesn't generate kapara? Maybe it's like the case of Shalol Shma. Let's say if the Kohen did the Avodah Shalol Shma, or let's take an easier case. Let's say Stom, right? The Kohen didn't have any machshav whatsoever. And the law would be that we bring the carbon, but it's not all the bayal l'shem chov. So what are we going to say? The bayal get no kapara from this carbon? We're going to bring the carbon without kapara. Okay, let's go to the next section called Vlados. Karbana shenifsalu. Yesh mehem shepsulon chal gam al vlodoseya. And let's read this again. Yesh mehem shepsulon chal gam al vlodoseya. Afsha vlados atzmon lo nifsalu osam psul. So I don't know, this sounds to me so identical to what we discussed before. If the mother is a balas mum and the vlad is a tam, is that not, doesn't that fit the description that he's talking about? Yeshmev chipsulon chal gamal vlados sehem, af shavlados atzman lo nifsulu beosabsu. So the vlad is not a balas mum, but yet it's excluded from the mizbeach. Mishum kedushas imam hapsula. Notice you go back to the original. V'yesh od, v'yesh a different category. She'ein avladas psulin mishum psul imam. Now I have the word gam here. What's I think we're missing. Let me see. Oh yeah, here's what we're missing. Gam Ivlados shenifsalu mishum psul imam yesh mehem shedomeim krevim l'shem oso karmon v'hem ayu kedoshim l'shem baleim yesh mehem shekrevim li'olas nidava. I said we'll have to. This becomes much more complicated. Note of where we got up to here. I think we'll have to go back to Vlados tomorrow. Tomorrow is Yom Chamishi, correct? And then we have Hanukkah. Are we learning regular days on Hanukkah? I always forget. Let me find out if I can, maybe with your help, what's the Kollel schedule? Because I think they get off either a day or 2 days. Can you find that out for me? Steve, you know any members of the Kollel?